live. Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Hello, everybody.
Happy New Year's. Happy 2022. Hopefully
2022.
It will be a much better year than 2021. Although this is the second year I've said that, and it's just like, well, I don't know what will come next. But
cross all the fingers.
This should be a more normal year, I think. Up until November, I think. Then we'll see.
With what, the midterm
elections
here in the U.S.?
We'll see what happens at the midterms. Depending on your political persuasion, it could go one way or the other. I'll just not favor one side, though. Anyways, we're back, actually, for 2022. This is our first show for the new year. We took a brief hiatus during the holiday so we could enjoy family and dodging COVID. Partially successfully, I guess.
Yeah, there was my partner sent me a little video of like people in 2022 dodging who hadn't had COVID yet, dodging it, and it was like one of those extreme Mario Maker levels where all the things are spinning and someone's trying to dodge it all.
That's what I've been doing, and I'm actually not sure if I successfully dodged it or not, because you're just like, I don't know, is this allergies? Is this a cat allergy, or is it COVID? I don't know.
Especially when you're boosted.
Yeah.
And you're like, it could just be that I am relatively asymptomatic. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways. So, welcome back, everybody. 2022 is here. This week brought us some interesting game news, mostly from CES, which we'll cover briefly. But the biggest one, I think, is the PSVR 2. There's a lot to talk about there, but I think next week we're going to focus our entire show on the aspects of PSVR 2 that we now know are confirmed, what it means for virtual gaming, and basically how can those new features being put in such a high-profile device, what that means for the future of VR development. I think it's generally good news, but we'll talk about those things, break them down, and kind of give a good idea of what that can mean for future VR titles. What else are we going to cover today, Eric?
We're going to look at sort of project forward and talk about the games that we're sort of excited about, that we expect to see either this year or that there is reason to believe that they're coming this year. And the ones we've chosen will sort of highlight something about either the developer or the industry, and we'll sort of discuss, what that could mean for gaming in 2022.
Yeah, I will say it's more console focused than it is PC. Like, there's some great PC games on the horizon, but it's harder to tell like what types of PC games are going to cause like systemic changes in the way games are developed. Mostly because PC games tend not to be on that. They'll be on the leading edge of like implementing new technology, but they won't be on the leading edge of that technology being adopted more widely. It usually is a console developer that will end up doing it because they can show that it's, you can get performant graphics using this new technique and running on a console. Whereas like with PC, you can always throw out the heaviest graphics card at it and get it to work, but that does not mean that you can get it for like the wider gaming space.
If you're sort of on bleeding edge of PC, a lot of, I think part of it is, and we've talked about this on the show before, but the difference in the audience, right? Gamers who play consoles tend en masse to just be, I got a game, I'm gonna play it. Whereas if you're a PC gamer, you're going to be like, you probably built your own PC or went out and bought a specific PC for it.
Unless you're going to go in. If you're a gamer specifically.
Yeah,
gamer,
right.
Yeah.
And you're going to get, go through and tweak all your settings and probably run some benchmarks and whatnot. Like I've been that person in the past. I'm not doing it right now simply because of time. But yeah, it's I suspect that like you said, a lot of there are new technologies, new approaches that are hammered out in the PC world and then sort of brought in and kind of pushed to a kind of solid place in the console space and made default.
It's supposedly like iterated to the point where it can be performant on a console, and then that's when it gets wider adoption. And so there's some important games to look at in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, there's on that note, real quick, there is a reason that Epic, besides money, of course, but that Epic showed off their Nanite engine for Unreal Engine 5 running on a PS5 first. They didn't bother with like an Nvidia graphics card or anything. It was PS5.
Yeah. And to not beat this point over and over again, but because the consoles and PCs are so much more similar than they've been, well, with the exception of the PS4 generation, that sort of now it seems that consoles lead the charge in development. So if it can run on a console, then it'll run on PC, and there's less and less of the like we'll do it on PC and then maybe 10 years from now we'll put it on a console. So yeah, there's stuff to talk about there. We're going to talk about the games that we think are going to be important either to the industry, to the developer, what those games are and what it means to either respective platform or entity. We're also going to talk about the top news that we think is going to be important to the industry, specifically the industry. I think these news items that we typically cover, we're kind of projecting forward again and going like, what are, based off what we know about the news that happened this past year, what news can we expect this year that is going to have the same sort of impact or a larger impact on the industry as a whole? We'll talk about what we think those news stories are and what kind of impact it's going to have. Yep. And then we'll also do like our New Year's resolutions as a company and what we plan to do. We won't dive into it too much, only because I am very tired and jet lagged, and we haven't put that much thought into it. But we'll talk briefly about that, in the spirit of setting resolutions and going into New Year refresh from 2021. So, on with the news. Also, actually, before we go on with the news, if you're just chiming in, we're on Twitch and YouTube, either platform with the slug Sonic Bloom TV, so youtube.com/SonicBloomTV or twitch.tv. Because of the streaming setup, we can't actually see comments coming in. So if you're commenting, we're sorry right now until we get some sort of setup that allows us to comment back. We're kind of like in an echo chamber for now, but please tune in, send us questions on the videos, we'll answer. So I hope you enjoy this program. So, like I said before, on to the news. First recap.
A little sound design.
Yeah, well,
soundboard.
Let's buy that with the company money.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, for sure.
I'll get one of those buttons with fart sounds and.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Else. Every time you talk, I'll be like, Brr. Yeah, 2022. What's the news recap? It's been a slow news cycle, kind of, because our people are coming out of the holiday, but we did get CES. Eric, what's the first major bit of news that came out of that?
Yeah, Sony announced their shockingly named PlayStation VR 2. Who could have possibly foreseen that would be the name?
Or like the spec sheet for that matter. I feel like that spec sheet was entirely called out prior to them making it official.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, there's really only so much that you can sort of expect for where the hardware is and for the limitations of, cost benefit. I guess it's like where the cost of components are these days, right? There's a sweet spot, and it's not hard to sort of nail that. There's always the like the really odd situation where they put a lot of money into one thing thinking this is going to be a critical component, as they did with, Sony did with the PS5 and their ridiculous hard drive speeds. But, like that's something that did not appear to be the case here. And I'm curious, like maybe the chip shortage helped with that, where they were like, nope, we're just going to pick stuff that is like, this is where the industry's at. This is where we're going to be at. We're going to make something that's great.
Yeah, I think, and we'll dwell on this next week, where we'll give like a larger segment just to breaking down the features of the PS VR 2 and what it means for VR gaming and where it kind of leads that area of development. But part of it that I think is interesting is that I think Sony is going to find a sweet spot for this where they can have all these cutting edge features. We're not cutting edge, but like what you see in higher spec VR platforms, but coming in at a price point that's not there. I mean, of course, unless you're buying a PS5 and a VR at the same time, but I think they'll be able to probably set the hardware price at a pretty reasonable rate.
For VR.
For VR, yeah. But I mean, if you look at it and you go like the Quest 2, which has an entire set of hardware inside of it, floats around $300. Then if they price somewhere around there, then they're probably quite like happily in the consumer range. If they can nail that, I think that's going to be the key to the VR2 being successful.
Yeah, their challenge with that is requiring a PS5, presumably.
It's almost definitely that will be the challenge, but I think they're already looking at a 5 million user base just within the first year. So
of PS5s?
Yes.
Yeah, it's way more than that now. Yeah,
I don't remember where that now. 12 million? Yeah, they went over 10 million. I think they projected 12 million for the year at the point in which they knew they were going to have hardware shortages. So there's probably numbers somewhere. I don't know what they are. I'm not going to speculate.
I just did a quick search, and Forbes says that in October 28th, 2021, they had 13.4 million.
There you go.
So over that.
Over that. So they have that user base to work off of either way. Next bit of news, Nintendo, I guess, handily won the holiday season. Even with hardware shortages across all three platforms, I think Nintendo was able to move the most amount of units, both in terms of profit as well as unit sales. So good for them, especially given it's like the last leg of the Nintendo, which I think we'll talk about a little bit, that they were able to still pull out a really successful last year. Reminds me of the PS1 and the PS2 where like the last 3 years they were like doing million sales in each month leading up to Christmas, and you're like, it's been out for 5 years. What's going on here? But usually gets priced at the right point, and especially if you're like itching to get like a PS5 and couldn't get one, then the Switch might have been a good alternative.
An excellent alternative. There's a huge library of games for that right now.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a nice
Ridiculous.
large back catalog. Other bit of news?
Yeah, the graphics cards. Go for it.
Thanks. I love going over graphics card specs. Basically, again, at CES, Nvidia and AMD revealed new graphics cards. Nvidia showed up the 3090 Ti, which is some beast of a card that's going to cost tons and tons of money. Does 40 teraflops of computing. It's a monster.
24 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, on paper, it's amazing. No one's ever going to be able to get it. Bots are going to scrape it up.
What's funny is, I mean, it's premium right now. If you have the money and it's funny money to you, great. It's a 10% boost, so not a massive
over
one.
the 3090 though, so
right,
which is also incredibly hard to get and incredibly expensive.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So it's going to be more expensive than 3090. It's going to be bigger. Who knows what the power consumption of this thing is? And what I'm thinking right now is like, well, whenever these TIs come out so late in the cycle, it's sort of like, I don't know, I'm just going to wait until the 4090 comes out and get whatever that set of stuff is.
What you do get is, I think they properly acknowledged that memory bandwidth was an issue with card performance, and so they addressed that with the TI by giving it more RAM, and I think they updated the memory type, the bus, to be a bit more faster. But I think the more interesting thing was that both AMD and Nvidia announced like low-end cards, both of which price under $300, but give really good performance for that price range. So Nvidia, I think, has the probably more impressive ones, $250, at least on paper. It's $250. Includes the RTX architecture, so it's capable of doing ray tracing. And fits right between the 3060, whatever. It kind of makes sense where it slots in, but it's a nicely priced performant card that will get you like latest graphics, but probably won't be able to run 4K
all the
60.
bells and whistles. Right.
Yeah. I think it's mostly frame rate and resolution that's going to have to take a hit on it, but otherwise you can get like the latest bells and whistles that Nvidia offers on their latest graphics cards at a price that's not $1,000. So and then AMD did something similar. They have a cheaper card. This one aims at having like 1080, like performant 1080p. So they're not even aiming at 4K, but having like a good 1080p experience. Think like PS4 Pro.
You mean the Xbox Series S?
Or yeah, I mean, or around there. It's actually probably that's probably the most apt comparison.
Yeah.
Old games will run at 4K, new games will run at 1080p, that sort of thing. But it's just nice to see them slotting some really nice performant, like middle tier cards that are actually going to be at a good price point, and they shouldn't have too many issues getting these out because I don't think scalpers or the cryptocurrency crowd's going to be going after these.
They might though.
They still will. Like there's nothing stopping people going after graphics cards, but
I mean, a year ago people were, well, maybe not quite a year ago, 8-9 months ago, people were going crazy for like 2 or 3 year old graphics cards. So like this probably does better than 3-year-old graphics cards, and
I think the benefit that they get is that they can probably fit more of these on a single die, and they don't have to hit performance targets that are ridiculous that like the 3090 achieves.
Yeah, I mean they could just be downclocked. Or chips that fell out of the fab for a higher spec card that they shut off cores on.
Almost certainly that's going to be the case. But actually, both of them are running on new fabrication or on new. So like the like
die processes.
Yeah, so like the 5600 or 6500 XT is on the I want to say it's on the 6 nanometer process from AMD opposed to the 7, which the older cards were on. So they've moved down a nanometer in their etching size. I think Nvidia also edged down like smaller, so it's probably their next gen fabrication.
So maybe it's their first foray into that. It's a low risk way to start bootstrapping the process and working out kinks.
So there's I mean, either way, these two cards are kind of interesting, but no idea what the performance is going to be like. We're going to wait for like Digital Foundry to play around with these and comparing against each other. So for now, just know that there's some new cards on the way, and if you're not like have thousands of dollars to dump on a gaming rig, there's going to be a new option that gets you really nice performance without having to break the bank. Let's move on to New Year's resolutions. Eric, did you make some New Year's resolutions for yourself?
I did. I got to play more games.
Yeah, I mean, I got to do the same thing, actually. I did less than I thought I was going to do last year.
Same. It was a lot of work. I mean, I did spend like a good almost an entire month moving. So there was that. And, I think coronavirus and a whole bunch of other stuff just took up an inordinate amount of time.
Also moved.
Yeah.
Also spent like half the year playing Ghost of Tsushima. So,
same. Yeah. That is a great game.
So, I mean, that's a good resolution. But as for us, I think we're going to keep streaming. We're not like growing our viewer base in huge amounts, but we have a good amount of people that at least sit around on our YouTube channel and subscribe to us for reasons. We're going to ask you guys, produce a survey at some point that's going to ask you about what you like us covering, what's enjoyable about this channel, and we'll see if we can do more of that. We still like to give an industry perspective on things, and hopefully that's appealing to people instead of just being like random guy that used to run a GameStop and now you want to comment on games and speculate in ways that probably don't make that much sense. But instead, you have us who at least have worked in the industry for quite some time and have a bit more of a business perspective on things, I guess.
Yeah.
Industry and business perspective. We also have our own product, Choreographer Pro. We have it on the Unity Asset Store. It's a game audio tool that we've sort of spent so much of our time putting our energy into. This year, we're going to be like officially launching Choreographer Cinema, which is an expansion of that tool set that hopes to actually promises a shift in the way we do game audio, and we hope that takes hold mostly for large game studios. Choreographer Cinema kind of pushes towards large game studios and says, hey, you should adopt this technology if you want your games to sound as cinematic as they look. So we'll be launching that initiative officially this year, and hope you guys tune into that and check out what our demo is capable of. We'll have more news on that in the future, but for now, that's what we're endeavoring. That's what our endeavor. I can't even use that now. My brain just like.
That's our goal.
I am endeavoring to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So my brain was like, that's not right. But I think that's my tired brain saying that. Any other resolutions?
That we're just going to try to do our best to do more game coverage. What we have been doing, try to do more of it, try to be more specific and focused, and maybe try to broaden our approach. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed as hosting this show last year was our interviews with other developers, and I would love to do more of that.
Yeah, that's another thing. I think that's a good point. Is our developer interviews? We're still kind of hammering out the process and how we do it the best to give people engaging content. But we talk to developers like we talk to other developers, and since that like we are developers, so we have a different sort of perspective on the interview, not just being like, what was fun about making the game, and what did you there's good interviewers out there, but I think we can dig into it a bit deeper, and I hope to bring more of that. That would be awesome. This is something I've always thought I'd like to do from way back when, which is like load up old games, stream them, and talk about what we think is great about them. But that would be like a not Sonic Boom Live, but more of like a game streaming. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VI and what we thought was great about that while we played through it, and bring
or a section of it, right? That's a long game.
Who's going to build up the save for that, though? That's the real question.
Right, yeah.
Because the beginning of that game goes very slow.
It does. It's also very long cutscenes with the opening
Not
credits.
Final Fantasy cutscenes, but yeah, they're longer cutscenes of just lots of exposition. So
yeah.
Cool. So let's move into the actual topics that we plan to talk about, even though we've gone 30 minutes talking about everything but.
Sure.
So games. 2022, I think, is going to be a really good year of gaming. So for those of you who enjoy gaming, I think this year finally sees the next-gen consoles really beginning to double down on the next-gen aspect of it. 2021 and the end of 2020, there was next-gen games, but they're really prior-gen games up-resed and running at a higher frame rate without actually doing much more in terms of graphics fidelity. A lot of it was like cheap upgrades, which is like, oh, here's ray tracing. It runs exactly like the PS4 version of it, but here's the one with ray tracing available in it because we can leverage RTX, or not RTX, but the ray tracing hardware, which is cool and all, but I really don't think we were seeing the extent of what next gen was. The Matrix demo, I think, gave us a peek at what we can sort of expect when console developers really lean into next gen and start developing. So we have that to look forward to. What else do we have to look forward to, I guess, in terms of why 2022 is a good year for gaming?
Yeah, I mean, other than what you already spoke to with sort of more formally switching over to next gen, where basically having the shift where next gen becomes current gen. I think we're of the announced games so far, I think the ones that are coming this year are likely to be the last set that are cross-gen. Yeah. So that we'll have, hopefully the manufacturers will be able to do more. The chip shortage, I don't know how long that's going to go on, but hopefully people who want PS5s can get PS5s, and people want Xboxes can get Xboxes. When that is all in place, hopefully later this year, we'll see games being developed strictly for the new platforms and be able to take full advantage of all the new hardware and everything in there. I think that's a trend that I'm hoping to see, like a shift complete, the generational shift complete. Yeah, I mean, other than that, it's sort of on a game by game basis. There's just basically industry news, but we'll get to that stuff later, like industry trends and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we could probably just dive into like the games that we think.
Yeah.
I think this is a mix of games that are most interesting because they promise something new, but also what it means for the game companies themselves. So like the first one, I think this is the one that's probably on a lot of people's minds, especially if you're a PS5 owner, and that's Horizon Forbidden West. It looks like a pretty game, but I think what's important about it is Guerrilla, who is a longtime developer for Sony, did the Killzone series, and Horizon Zero Dawn was kind of a surprise to a lot of people in 2017, that it was a coherent story where you could have dinosaur robots roaming around and it made sense. It started like a game that opened us up to a world that was intriguing. But beyond that, the engine that Horizon is built on is also the same engine that was used for Death Stranding. So they've had, at this point, like 5 years of development on this engine, building Horizon 2 or Forbidden West. I think it's important mostly because we actually see the fruits of that labor. Like, what has 5 years of development from a Sony AAA studio? What will that get us? And their engine that they've been developing out, which is going to be available to other developers if they license it, possibly even other internal Sony studios. Like, what is that going to do as it moves from the past gen into, PS5 next gen territory? Eric, do you have anything else to say on that?
Not really. I mean, I think part of this, and this isn't the only Sony kind of first-party studio that will come up in our list, but we're seeing Sony kind of double down over the last couple of years on their sort of story-driven single-player experiences, and this one is something that they've been pushing for a couple of years now. Like, it's been announced, they keep showing it at their showcases, and it'll be interesting to see just how it's received, because I think that will be a little bit of a bellwether of Sony's of being able to tell like how successful Sony's strategy has been. So this, on the game industry side of things, let alone how much we as players are going to enjoy it, it's sort of like, does the strategy work? Is this going to pay off for them, or is this sort of like a really expensive? They took a bet and they'll have to reevaluate after this,
or just how long the strategy can really last? Because while Sony is arguably some of the top storytellers, narrative game developers in the industry right now, they are clearly stuck in the third-person action category. Oh yeah, and they've had trouble breaking out of that and expanding to other genres that are also interesting. Not to say that they can't keep doing it, because there's no reason to say that a third-person action games are done. It's like third-person action games, as long as there's a narrative, story, and gameplay mechanics, I don't see why it would ever go out of style. It's like saying like action movies are dead because they made too many of them. Sometimes it just gets stale because they stop innovating. That's what happens. So it's a question about, can Sony continue to innovate on this sort of area?
And it becomes an issue, particularly when you're dealing with sequels, where your innovations are sort of restricted in a way, because there's already player inbuilt expectations about what they're going to get. And in many ways, a sequel is sort of a almost a polished version of what the developers originally wanted to do,
Right.
but either couldn't for technical reasons or they didn't have time to get something in, so they pull everything back. And then when done well, the sequel can kind of fit all of that stuff in and become polished.
It's usually the threequel that usually flounders at times.
Yeah.
It's where, like you were saying, first one's the first attempt, but usually promises like, here's a new way of playing a game. Here's a new way of storytelling or whatever it is that gets introduced to you. And you go like, oh, I like what's here. And the second game is usually where they polish it and it feels like a much more complete game, as you said, because like things are just left on the cutting room floor. They pick up again and somehow get back into their sequel. It's the third one where it's just like, how long can you run this formula?
Yeah. And like, we have to change things. So let's put on our design caps and think about what we can change and what we can innovate on, and they
without changing the formula too much. It's like the Nintendo problem,
right?
Where it's like if people like Mario, but how much can you change Mario before it's not Mario anymore? And I think Nintendo struggled with that at times, and as have other game developers. So
yeah, but there is something to be said for like, with the Nintendo strategy, there are given enough time between certain steps. There is frequently let me say this, for me subjectively, I sometimes love going back and getting that like 2D Mario side-scrolling made by Nintendo. They nailed it. They are the kings of this format. Love it. They do little things here and there that sort of innovate on that formula. Fine. Sometimes even like small adjustments might go a little bit far. I had a problem with the sequel to Katamari Damacy because I felt the first game was so good, but also almost too short. And I really just wanted more of that. Like, I just wanted more. And when the second one came out, it had all these little mechanics that you had to worry about and do everything. It sort of broke the flow for me. So to your point, that was them in a sequel changing up the formula rather than, and like stepping outside of the bounds of that formula and possibly breaking their own formula for that game. But we'll see with Horizon Forbidden West whether what Sony does with this. They've had success with sequels and even threequels in the past. So
I think this will be and just want to keep an eye on. I highly doubt that if you're a fan of Horizon Zero Dawn that you'll be disappointed with the second one. I think the real question will come in at the third one. But at the very least, we get to see what 5 years of development gets us. On a similar note, want to talk about the next game at all?
I know very little about this game. The Suicide Squad killed the Justice League.
But similarly, it's like I think it's similar to Horizon in the respect that when was Arkham City or Arkham Knight?
Yeah. So for those who are unaware, this Rocksteady Games, they made the Batman Arkham series of titles. Which, how many of those have there been? There was Arkham. It was like 4 or 5.
3 developed by Rocksteady, which was Arkham
right.
Asylum, Arkham City, Arkham Knight.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep going?
Yeah. No. I was going to say that I don't really know much more about this.
I mean,
game.
There's not much more to know because there's actually not that much available. They did Warner Brothers had their yearly like Warner Brothers-a-thon where they focus on like the DC properties and what they're going to bring in these like games, cartoons, and movies. With that, they finally showed a full-length gameplay trailer of Kill the Justice League. Not much is known, but it's them stepping away from the Batman series for the first time. So we get to see what the fruits of that is. Like, what happens when you take 4 or 5 characters that all have different move sets and power moves and powers, and how do you translate that into like an open world-ish action game that feels constrained appropriately, but also feels like they've gone into a new direction. But they've spent, again, like a very similar amount of time. I think it's Arkham Knight might have come out in 2016. So, like 6 years developing out this
They've
title.
been working on it since Arkham Knight?
Presumably, right? Like they've gone from Arkham Knight, started either developing a new engine from the ground up or stripping down the engine for Arkham Knight and building it back up again to something that's modern.
Arkham Knight was released in 2015.
2015, so yeah, 7 years.
7 years, wow. That was released on Unreal Engine 3.
Yeah, which tells you a lot.
Wow, yeah.
So, I mean, at the very minimum, they stuck with the UE platform. That's them going from 3 to 4 and adopting a bunch of the new graphic rendering techniques.
Well, they've been working on it for a while. Presumably, they'd been updating the engine along with their development, but who knows?
Yeah. But I think this is kind of like a make or break situation for Rocksteady. They're kind of in a weird situation where they've gone so long without a new game that the next game has to be a success, and it also has to show that they're capable of breaking outside of the Batman formula for them to be successful. And if not, then you're like, they just really did great Batman games, and that's what they're good at. And unfortunately, whatever caused them to not be able to make a good Justice League game, that might condemn them for a bit, which would be unfortunate. But at the very least, it's going to be an interesting topic. They're fighting the Justice League because of, I think, Brainiac, corrupts the minds of all the superheroes, and they have to go take them down one by one. At the very least, it should be an interesting story. I think they've had a lot of help from the DC side to make something interesting. Just if the gameplay moves along with it. And there's not really a whole lot of doubt from me that says that they couldn't make interesting gameplay around it.
Oh, for sure. The love that they showed Batman in those games and that property, both Batman and Spider-Man were sort of like on this level of like, boy, the developers clearly showed mad respect. They loved the source material and showed mad respect to it in the games. So,
and you got it in the gameplay experience, which is nice.
Yep.
Next game. I'm not sure how much this is going to be like sort of industry defining or even like studio defining, but Ubisoft went about and decided to bring back Sands of Time, which was at one point, Prince of Persia Sands of Time was at one point like a staple for Ubisoft. It was like, once it started waning in popularity, that's when they picked up Assassin's Creed, and I think a lot of the tech that was being developed probably for Prince of Persia had moved over to the Assassin's Creed engine or whatever you call it. But it used to be like a staple IP for Ubisoft, but they basically just hammered it into the ground. Like after Prince of Persia was amazing in so many ways and had, was it Michael Ancel, who for a long time was a big developer for Ubisoft, was behind Rayman, the Kong game, and Beyond Good and Evil. I think he worked on this one as well. Then I think departed with Ubisoft for the most part. So there was a lot of opportunity to do something interesting with this game, and Ubisoft took Prince of Persia and kind of broke the formula and turned it into, instead of like a charming fairy tale like story, turned it into a brooding and dark one. Depending on when you played it and what age you were, you might find the second or third game more appealing or less appealing, but they just kind of lost the formula in it and abandoned the property. What is kind of interesting is it seemed like they were going to do a cheap cash-in where they got like an Indian studio that was kind of not their top-tier studio redeveloping the game. And they rolled it out, I think, at E3 in 2020, and people were like, what is this? This does not look like what I want a remaster to look like. I think it was supposed to be released this year, and it was delayed. I think delayed because they may be reassessing what that means, like what Prince of Persia means to Ubisoft. I think this game might be able to re-solidify the Prince of Persia ideas, like the ideas within that game and the property itself could mean a lot to Ubisoft if they just handled the property with a bit more respect. And if it does actually turn out to be a popular game, that maybe this changes the trajectory of Ubisoft, which has come more and more to focus on just Assassin's Creed and Tom Clancy games. You have any feelings on this, Eric?
Sort of. I mean, Sands of Time was a shockingly good game. I remember playing it. Was it back in college, something like that, and
Hmm.
it was, I think I had the GameCube version, and oh boy, was that quite an amazing experience. Um, and then they decided for some reason that like the thing that made that game so interesting was their time mechanic.
Yeah.
And then I think at some point that series jettisoned that, and it became the story of the prince, and it sort of they just started doing random 3D action puzzler type gameplay mechanics, and they sort of went away. I'm all for a remake. I don't know that this is going to reboot the IP for them. Um, Especially not. I'm a little bit hesitant with the like the way that they in 2020 did their announcement.
Yeah.
It was a little bit like, oh, cool, they're gonna do. Oh, are they? Do they care? Like, what is
Yeah.
happening right now? And it would be very nice to see some new stuff from Ubisoft that wasn't Rainbow Six or excuse me, Tom Clancy or Assassin's Creed stuff. Because like I don't know, I got burned out from the Assassin's Creed series, and I really like a lot of the stuff they do, and I'd love to dive in again. But I'm just like I can't get myself motivated to play an Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah. I keep buying them and not playing them, so I don't know what
Hey,
that says about me, but
yeah, you're keeping them afloat, so there is that.
I bought Origins and was like, this one looks interesting. I want to run around Egypt. But then I was like, but do I want to play Assassin's Creed?
Right, exactly. I'm going to put it into historical mode and just wander around.
These are probably fighting words to some people, but
Oh, for sure, for sure. But I mean, you get that with every single game, right? And every single IP. I
yeah,
I think that like if they remake it, they're going to need to do something where they realize that the time mechanic is Prince of Persia from the early 2000s. That was the thing that made the games
well, I think
interesting.
it was the storytelling, like keeping a
Yeah.
charming story,
Yep.
and then the mechanics were basically, yeah, here's a room that you need to figure out how to get around, and we're giving you a reset that doesn't feel like you're making negative progress in a room,
Right.
which for a game that focused on traversal, I think that was really important. And at some point, it became more about the combat, which
Yep.
was good in that game, but it's just they
It wasn't.
really lost it.
Yeah, the thing that you remember that I remember, I don't remember the combat very much. I do remember a little bit of it. The thing I remember from that is like running along a wall, like falling, jumping across, missing something because the timing was bad, rewinding time back up, and then jumping again and doing that. Like
Yeah,
that's what the game was. That was the most fun part of that game. And like, yeah, the later games had the prince, but they sort of lost that piece.
yeah. It would be like if they took Portal and they're like, I know what made Portal awesome, fighting GLaDOS. And
Yeah.
you're like, I'm not sure if that was what the most rewarding part of it was.
Yeah, no, that was banter was good, which was also good in Prince of Persia. Like as part of the storytelling, right? Like the princess. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that game had a whole bunch of like sort of comedic interplay between the prince and the other
Yeah.
character, right?
Like the thing that's worth noting here is that Prince of Persia, what they did with their storytelling and how they have the banter that you're talking about, I think informed the way games like Uncharted
Mm-hmm.
carried
Mm-hmm.
forward that sort of that same sort of idea. Like, hey, you can keep the character development happening throughout the game, and in respect
During
to what you're
actions.
doing,
Yeah.
that made it feel more like involved than just like story game. Instead, it was like
Yeah.
story and game at the same time, which people probably don't credit Prince of Persia too much with, but I really feel like that's where like a lot of the modern character development came from that you see in games like Uncharted. It had to have been heavily influenced by Prince of Persia Sands of Time.
And to an extent, they may have influenced each other, like doing this one-upsmanship at that generation. Because wasn't that around the same time that Uncharted 1 was out?
Not
Oh, no, that was PS3?
Yeah, it's PS3.
Oh,
Uncharted
yeah.
PS3
Oh, yeah.
and
Yep.
Uncharted and Prince of Persia was
GameCube, PS2.
generation.
Yep.
The Xbox One was the one that was based off of the movie, or Xbox 360 one was based off the movie, which
Yeah.
tried to recapture it, but
Well, that's another point, though, that sort of personality that the game really brought to the story. Yeah, that that came out in the game story, let's say, was a lot of the driving quality of what made that theatrical release of Prince of Persia, the movie, have whatever charm it had was driven a lot by that. The angry princess and the banter between this prince and the princess, and like their conversation is what really sort of makes that movie, and gives it a sort of a levity as well as a comedy, all its own. And that was that tone was pulled right out of the game. Yeah. Even though the story is totally different, like, well, not totally different, but it's quite different. But
there's an entire scene where they ride ostriches.
Yeah,
that's definitely not in the game.
That is not in the game. The Umbaktu are also not in the game. Yeah. I actually really like that movie, but anyway.
Yeah, I know you got very animated when we started talking about the movie, so nothing wrong with that.
Well, no. So the reason that I was getting animated was because that sort of leads into a topic we're going to talk about later on this show.
Yeah, with
games coming into movies.
Yeah, and what actually happens with that, because I think there's been a lot of misses with
exactly.
movies. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Shall we move on?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the next game, or do you want me to?
I think you should. I mean, I know exceedingly little about it. I'll mention it. We're talking about Starfield here as sort of a
To be fair, no one knows that much about it. Shockingly little. For a game that's supposed to be released in 2021, people know shockingly little about it. It is Bethesda's next game after Fallout 76, but it's not actually, I don't know if it's a multiplayer game. I don't think it is. I think it's them returning back to the world of RPGs, but this one it's going to be in sci-fi space, and it looks to be like a sci-fi space game that's more akin to say 2001 Space Odyssey or Alien, like grounded space sci-fi, opposed to out there, kind of like Outer Worlds was, like cartoonish and kind of more of a platform for political commentary than it was about let's talk about sci-fi. So I think this one's going to be maybe like Ad Astra or something. It's grounded sci-fi game, but nothing is known beyond that. I think the thing that can be said about this is this is Bethesda coming back to RPGs in a way that seems promising, but they are carrying a burden on their shoulders, because after Fallout 3, they were riding a wave of popularity. Skyrim delivered, and people were like, they can't do any wrong. Fallout 4 gets announced, and people were all for it. And then when it landed, people were like, wait a second, this is lacking a lot of what we really were hoping for. Yeah. The storytelling, the RPG elements, the sort of immersion, the really kind of, I call them dioramas, discoverable dioramas sprinkled throughout the land, just was missing from that game. It felt a lot more hollow than I think either Skyrim or Fallout 3, and it put a sour taste in people's mouth. So when Fallout 76 was announced and failed to deliver even worse than Fallout 4, I think people started turning their back on Bethesda. Why that's the case, why they failed to deliver on that, there's a lot of speculation, they had investors that put a lot of pressure on them to get a game out before it was ready. And now that Microsoft is kind of owning the development of Bethesda's next game, it really calls into question, okay, given the resources and no excuses about having the pressure of a publisher to push a game out, can they deliver a game that is a wholly new IP that allows them to explore whatever topic they want and build an immersive RPG experience that is as endearing as Fallout 3 was to a lot of gamers? So
yeah, the part of the thing that gets me about this title from an industry perspective is that a lot of the things you just said are actually red flags for me. When you're they can do whatever they want, they don't have publisher pressure, they don't have all these things, they're that is typically a disaster for explosion in scope, which means that you're wrangling the content of the game and making sure that it has a cohesive through line of gameplay and narrative, and bringing all that together is extremely difficult to manage and manage well. And if you don't have a publisher breathing down your neck and you're just told no, you guys are amazing, you can do whatever you want, there's no sort of pressure to finish, and people will just not finish. That's sort of the concern there.
I think the real red flag, though, is that in E3 2021, Bethesda was there, but they showed so little of Starfield. And you could go, well, it's because they don't want to show an unpolished game. But that means that E3 2022 is when they would show the game, and then presumably, if it actually is going to still launch in 2021, they would have it ready for fall release. For a game with the scope of this, to show its first real gameplay at E3 and then launch shortly thereafter is a little jarring. Like, they should be able to show more of a functional game prior to that, at least a polished area of it. And
unless this is something that Microsoft is specifically planning in terms of like a marketing campaign, normally you would announce a little bit earlier as well. But for a game of this scale, to help put it out there, start building an audience, start building, the getting the interest from fans and everything, and build hype, so that when it launches, it's not like, oh, this was announced 2 months ago. Wait, I missed that. What happened? Right? There's time. People get expectations built up. The next E3 is playable, right? Which I guess to be fair, that was what happened this last time. I think they showed a very short clip that a lot of people were like, that's pre-render, right?
Well, potentially. I mean, it could have been an engine. It could have been running on a PC. I mean, it doesn't look so spectacular that it couldn't have been in an engine. I think the crazy thing is that if it releases in 2022, the 2021 showing showed nothing. It just showed like a small video. So like, where was the promise of what kind of gameplay to expect? Where was the promise of what kind of game it is? Is it multiplayer? None of that stuff was really divulged. It's just like, here's Starfield. And you're like, great. Like, I can see Bethesda's returning to RPG in an area that could be really interesting. But what are they actually going to deliver?
Yep. Who knows? I mean, I don't
know. In 2021, they finally show gameplay. It's just like, that's an awful lot for a game. Riding on a game for like a 6-month advertising timeline to sign up, get like everybody signed up on and out to the public in a way that's not going to be disappointing. So, and with the success of this, that's going to be determining like whether or not the next Elder Scrolls game is going to have the same popularity behind it.
Yeah.
So, it should be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, on to the next game. This is a game that you're interested in there, so you want to talk about it?
Tiny Tina's Wonderland. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am excited.
Go talk about it.
Yeah, I know actually very little about it other than the fact that it's sort of, I don't know if it's in the world of, or it's sort of like, so in the world of Borderlands, which I'm a big fan of their art style, their art direction, and the humor of that game and that series. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of like the imagination world of a character from Borderlands. So
yeah.
It sort of takes place in a Borderlands influenced area, but it has all these like spectacular elements to it that are more kind of fantasy oriented rather than kind of space sci-fi futuristic stuff.
Yeah.
And
you nailed it.
Yeah. And so I'm excited for this because I tend to like Gearbox designs. The games that they put together tend to be pretty well, they're fun. There's a lot of critics that say, take issue with some of what they do, and that's fine. But to be given kind of a space to really explore hectic, crazy characterization and humor and story, that's sort of an aspect that I'm really looking forward to. And if their marketing material, if it's not just a really good marketing team that's been behind this stuff so far, but if their development team is also on this, if the marketing, it reflects the energy and the humor of the development team as they're doing this, then I think we're in for a treat with this one.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is, well, Gearbox has its fair of criticism, and for good reason. Not just because of its like abuse scandals, but also because of a handful of like just really missed opportunities, games that they had possession of that just were bad, like Duke Nukem and Aliens. Games like that were just like, well, that's how do you go from a good game to like something as bad as those games? But I think what Borderlands showed is when they're allowed to be creative and kind of do their own thing, that their Austin-based creative teams were able to come up with something that was spectacular. But within the past 3 iterations of this game, it's just like they really seem to be pushing the formula to the extent of where it's just like people are no longer as interested in it.
Yeah.
And this is a nice, this is them not straying too far from Borderlands, which has been a success for them and a pretty consistent success, but going how can we let our creative team be more creative within this, and they found a way to do it, which I think is going to be hilarious.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I think if they can pull it off, it may sort of legitimize that as an approach, and maybe it'll incentivize other developers to take a look and see what sorts of fun they can have with their IP in a way that sort of allows the original IP to be there. If they ever want to go back to do another Borderlands, they can. It's not like this is world changing. So
that we know of.
That is a good point. From the market.
To be fair, even if they turn it into some sort of world changing event for Borderlands, it's not like that story that they're telling in Borderlands couldn't use that to do something even more interesting or creative.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So up next, what do we have?
Pokemon Legends. I actually tossed around the idea of whether or not I would include Zelda, but I have a strong feeling that Zelda is not a 2022 release.
Yeah. That's a
surprise.
This is a decades of Nintendo development experience. Not us, just as consumers experiencing Nintendo's development patterns, right? Where they're like, we announced a game and we gave an expected release date, and it's like inevitably a year and a half after that it actually comes out.
I think for the little that they've been able to show, that this is the type of game that they'll show off at E3. Possibly or some other large, Nintendo event, but not because it's going to be released this year, but because it will get a year later release.
I will say though that the reason that I'm like Legend of Zelda, I still see a maybe for 2022 is because the speed at which, the time as I recall between when they were like, here is a video demo of Breath of the Wild in our announcement trailer or whatever, and the actual release of the Switch and the game was way shorter than I was used to. Though there may have been extra pressure for them to get that done because it needed to be a launch title. So,
yeah, there's that as well.
They can do it. It's just super rare.
Also, Nintendo is the type to reinvent the wheel, especially with Zelda.
Yeah.
Maybe this is most analogous to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which use the same engine, but were very different types of games. Mm-hmm. I do not see Nintendo doing a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild because they don't really do that. They haven't done it before. If they do it now, it's going to be a break in their formula. I don't know for better or for worse. I don't know how much more story there is to tell within the Breath of the Wild universe. And even the gameplay they showed back at E3 last year really was more flight-based, floating islands and stuff like that. So even if it takes place in the Breath of the Wild world, it's going to be more like Pandora than it's going to be the more grounded land of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, they seem to Nintendo seems to really have an interest in doing these disparate areas, right? They did an entire Mario series about little planetoids that you would jump between and everything. And they've done Skyward Sword, and they've done, I don't know, it's just heck, the original Mario had floating islands, right? You jump onto bricks that were just in the sky.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what happens in real life.
Yeah. It does. It's right out there. Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess with that, we talked about Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever people are calling it. I don't think it's Breath of the Wild 2.
Yep.
I also don't think it's coming this year. But what I do think is Pokemon Legends.
Arceus.
Arceus or whatever. It's weird. But do you want to talk about why this is important for Nintendo and the Pokemon series?
I'll just get it kicked off, but I think you may have more experience with this IP to be able to chat about it. It's this for them. It's sort of weird. This for them is like a dramatically different direction for Pokemon than has for that IP than has happened in the past. We sort of had two main lines of game, three if you include two. I was going to say three if you include the mobile app by Niantic, but that's not actually the case because when you battle, it's simple, whatever. But the games are like Pokemon Snap and Stadium, or you battle and you have like the two characters and they do the wiggle and they do their attacks. This is like a whole open world thing, very much in the style of Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Many comparisons have been drawn between them. And it's sort of a moment where like Pokemon fans can look at it and say, oh my gosh, it's not just like now I have new Pokemon to collect, that's the innovation, kind of the innovative thing that's happening. It's a whole new way to experience the world.
Yeah. I for the Pokemon franchise, which is like spanned 20 years at this point, longer.
More. It's like 30 years.
Yeah, whatever it is, 30 years of Pokemon games. The problem that I think most people have raised towards that is like here's this foundation for like this really amazing RPG where you go out into the wild, you catch wild creatures, and then you train them and you bring them to gyms where you fight against other opponents, and there's some light storytelling in between. But the formula is there, and what Nintendo has like repeatedly failed to do is create a next-gen version of that doesn't feel like a Game Boy version of it. It's been a primarily mobile game where every major release was being released on the handheld consoles, and the primary way of playing it like really just didn't change. It was third-person view of some sort as you moved in like very strict cardinal directions around the map and found Pokemon, and it never really immersed you the way that I think people were seeing in other RPGs. And that was a lot of criticism that was thrown at Nintendo. And generation after generation, they're like, where is that next generation RPG version of Pokemon? And instead, they've been pretty satisfied with just sticking with, Sapphire, Crystal, Diamond, Shield, whatever, so on and so forth, of these games that are just iterations on the formula. And I think like Mario and Zelda before it, people were just like, this is enough of this. Can you give us something that really pushes this direction in a new way? And finally with this, it really feels like Nintendo's taking the same approach that they did with Mario and Zelda this generation and saying, we can break aspects of what makes these games Mario and Zelda and Pokemon, to push it in new areas without changing fundamentally what these things are. Like Mario can be a platformer that isn't levels and like obstacle courses and still feel like a Mario game. Zelda can be an RPG that's pretty well structured on dungeons and whatever else, but add a lot more freedom. And it seems to be the same thing with they're finally venturing out with Pokemon and saying, it can still be about catching creatures and battling them, but without it being locked to a third-person view that feels like you're just playing a sparklier version of a Game Boy game.
Yeah, it could be a little bit more like experiencing what the animated series made the world look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what probably people have been wanting to experience for 20 plus years. So
yeah, I mean, I just did a quick look up, and the original game Red and Blue came out on the Game Boy in 1996. 26 years ago. The animated series based on the anime came out in 1997. It was a year. Like,
I didn't realize they're that close to each other, but
yeah, neither did I.
They knew what they were doing with their marketing.
They sure did. They probably had good reason to believe that at least it would be a success in Japan.
Yeah, but either way, like they really need to break out of that shell. And Pokemon Go, Pokemon Stadium, Pokemon Puzzle League, and Snap are not really what people are looking for. They're looking for the Pokemon experience without it being exactly like the other Pokemon experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's 26 years of fans that may find that appealing enough to jump back into it. So it could be like a huge seller for them if they just manage to not blunder it by making a game that just feels less than adequate.
Yeah.
All right, next game. We're almost done with this, I swear.
Yep. We'll try to do these last ones quick. God of War Ragnarok.
What's important about this game, Eric?
It's very similar to the Horizon Forbidden West. It's sort of more of a Sony first-party title coming out. It is a sequel to another game in a series. In this case, it's actually like another entry in a much longer series. But it's in terms of this story arc within that series, it is the sequel to the previous God of War game. And a lot of it is how it kind of speaks to how Sony has been managing these ridiculously complex games, not only from a narrative perspective and a story perspective, but from a technology perspective. This is a game that is going to be cross-platform, PS4, PS5, and how well are they going to sort of cross that gap, manage the cross-gen compatibility, while also delivering on the story and the gameplay mechanics that the fans of that series have come to expect and enjoy. As someone who enjoyed the original, at least trilogy, I'm not sure I ever played God of War 4, but the original 1, 2, 3, and then a few of the PSP games.
There wasn't 4.
There was not.
God of War 4 was God of War.
Oh, then I have played probably all but maybe one PSP game. At any rate, they as someone who's a fan, I was very skeptical of God of War sort of modern. And it was at your behest, actually, that I play it, and you were gracious enough to let me borrow your game and play it, and I did, and oh boy. Yeah.
I mean, what was great about God of War was that they, kind of like Zelda and kind of what we're talking about with Pokemon, was just they were able to take a formula that has been kind of overdone and didn't need to be rehashed.
Nope.
And took it in a new direction. Now, I know angered a lot of fans of like that old style, but what they were able to do is, transition from like a, machismo, eighth graders idea of what like a superhero is, and turning it into a more mature storytelling experience that still felt like God of War. Still had the brutality of it, but actually was able to reflect on it a bit better than the games prior that kind of just glorified the violence in a way that's probably not healthy. Ragnarok does end like a trilogy, but it's still a 2-part trilogy. So it's not really a trilogy, but they're saying like, basically what they're saying is the amount of content in these is as much as a trilogy would have.
I believe it.
The original that's why they're not doing a trilogy.
The original one was shockingly long. I was surprised at how long it was and how much content was in it.
Yeah. But, with the kind of polish and details that we have in games today, I think it's really hard to do that sort of length. But
yes.
I think what will be interesting is how they actually finalize this, what Sony Santa Monica does from this point forward. Like, we know that there's a parallel team that actually has taken a lot of the creative team behind God of War and has moved them on to a new project. So this is going to be the cap to this one, and then we may not see God of War for a bit, at least not like something to the caliber of God of War or God of War Ragnarok. But also I'm looking forward to whatever the next game is. The last one is Lego Star Wars, which might be a surprise to some. But I think what's interesting about Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga, is TT, Traveler's Tales, has been pumping out Lego games for a very long time. And the Lego Star Wars game is the first time they kind of took a sizable hiatus from developing these games. And it's now been a couple of years since they've released any sort of Lego game in favor of working on how to reinvent these Lego games, which probably have been starting to get stale for them and not selling like they used to. So they had to take a step back and say, how are we going to reinvent Traveler's Tales to take the Lego franchises forward without, rehashing stuff that we've always rehashed. At some point, people don't need to play DC villains and feel like that there's anything significantly different than Marvel's Avengers, right? So they did the reasonable thing and said we have to take a step back, we have to reinvent the engine, we have to reinvent the graphics, and Skywalker Saga will be the first game that shows us how far Traveler's Tales has actually been able to stray from their formula, making it feel familiar but fresh. Did they actually achieve that? If they don't, I don't know if they're going to be able to continue doing what they've been doing. But if they do, I think we might be able to see the Lego games move in new directions and keep one of these perennial studios alive, into the next generation. Why I think it's important.
Yep. It's is that all you wanted to say on that one?
Yeah, but you can say anything you want on it.
Oh no, I mean I think you've basically covered it. It's certainly a title for a certain type of game that will sort of it does feel a little bit like make or break, or at least like this is a last ditch almost reset of Lego
Maybe
stuff.
not quite a last ditch, but actually any studio that's attached to Warner Brothers, which Traveler's Tales is, may actually be realistically make or break since it's not a priority for Time Warner. Yeah, they're mega conglomerate, AT&T, Time Warner, AOL, whatever, so on and so forth.
And Lego is a huge. We don't know what the deals are about who has what rights to the IP of the Lego brand. Right.
I mean, there's some sort of rights given to TT that's been clearly renewed over and over again. It's not exclusive to them, though.
Right.
There's other Lego games that are not built by Traveler's Tales, and I think they've been able to hold on to it because they've been able to produce games that have sold well enough, and probably, if we're being fair, have introduced people to video games in a way that's
they're very approachable.
Yeah, they're extremely approachable. I know I played them with my youngest brother, and we enjoyed them together. So, I think it's an important developer that's been there for a long time, and they really need to reinvent themselves at this point. And this is their stab at that. Hopefully, it's successful for them because I think they kind of have an important niche, just maybe not one that produces a game every year.
Yes. There was one more game that I wanted to bring up at the last minute, throw my hat in there, which was I'm not actually sure if this is scheduled to come out in 2022. I'm guessing that it is, but it's the Dead Space remake. And
I'm not sure if it is either, but yeah.
Yeah. The reason that I want to mention it is because of kind of EA's approach to the development of it, and how we talked a lot about this last year when they announced it, is how shockingly open they were, showing in development models and almost giving, like, the first look of the game was basically a GDC style talk where they're like, developers are talking about how much they're paying attention to players, what they're doing, how they're lovingly trying to keep what made the original Dead Space while upgrading it for the current, next gen consoles. And if they can nail that, then I think that, and that is successful in terms of sales, then this may be sort of a path forward for other games to get such a treatment.
Yes, I think this is their second experiment into that. I think Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Did they do that with JFO?
They did. Well, in part because Respawn has done so many successful games for EA that I think they gave them the creative freedom to do a Star Wars game like that didn't have microtransactions, that didn't have loot boxes, that didn't have
stuff. Yeah.
And was allowed to give them some amount of creative freedom to explore game. Now, they weren't as transparent in the development as, say, at least the first episode of Dead Space Revealed, or whatever they want to call it, was, but it showed that a step for EA was you can make single player games that perform well, will make their money back. All you have to do is stop trying to turn them into games that they're not supposed to be in order to make money.
Yeah.
And Dead Space, they're promising this with Dead Space. I think we'll find out with the success of Dead Space, just in the development alone, as to whether or not they really respect the creativity of their creator or of their development teams, or if they're going to try to shoehorn in some sort of money-making scheme that's going to undermine that. So yeah, we'll see. We were asked to talk about Elden Ring as well, but I don't actually think Elden Ring is going to be
A 2022
a game
title.
changer. Like, no, it's a 2022 title for certain, but I don't know how important it is that it's able to do much more with the Souls type formula
Yeah.
in any meaningful way. Like, people like those games as they are, and they only have to like marginally innovate on it without doing anything significantly different for it to be a success.
Yeah. Look, here's one thing that I'm thinking of. I know that there's like the big thing to me, and I bring this up every time the game comes up, is that George R. R. Martin is attached to it as a writer, producer, whatever. That may speak to the fact that the game might be more story-driven than the Souls titles have been in the past, which, you know, I've only really played through part of one, and it didn't strike me as the most story-driven game. It was definitely a mechanics-driven, like, you know, exploration title. Fine. My fear is that, you know, part of what makes a Souls game is ridiculous difficulty, and you need to keep going over and over and over and over again. And that is not a great cycle for a game where part of the purpose for you to play it is to get the narrative. Like, dying 100 times at a boss is very frequently a reason to put the game away when you're trying to play it partially for the story. You're like, I want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
I'm going to go into the menu and turn it on to easy mode because I just don't care. Like, I care more about the story than I do about the mechanics. And I'm not sure if they can nail it. Maybe that'll be sort of a new thing that they'll have opened up in the game space. But, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. There's actually, this is totally unrelated in ways that, well, it may seem unrelated, but X Plays Back, if people haven't noticed, and Adam Sessler is going about giving reviews of games again, which is excellent if you grew up with that sort of thing. But he's re-reviewing a bunch of old titles that haven't been given reviews by him, and he did one on Alien Isolation, which a lot of people were really impressed by because of how well they nailed the aesthetic of the first Alien movie.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, his criticism toward it was, how do you have a story-driven game that's basically like 20 hours long, where you have a dynamic alien system that forces you to gate your speed at which you're progressing through a story-driven game, because you have to now hunker down and wait for an alien to not catch you so that you can make a little bit more progress. And while that mechanic works really well, it works really well when you don't have the framing of a story that's trying to drive you forward, because you have one thing that drives you forward and you have another thing that drives you back. And it feels more frustrating to get through the entire game to hear through the story when you deal with a system like an alien is dropping in on you and going like, well, I guess I have to wait here until this thing stops so I can get the rest of the story. And they're kind of at conflict with each other. And that may very well be the case with Elden Ring, where it's like, if you have a compelling story written by George R. R. Martin, but you have Souls gameplay that sort of is there to impede that in a way that can be frustrating when you're just trying to hear the rest of the story, it may actually work against it and not work to its favor.
Yeah. Now, maybe they're making it a little bit more roguelike to an extent. I think I personally think of Souls games as not quite roguelike, because you don't do a run, there's no cycle per se. You kind of die and go back a ways, and you die and you come back and try to get your stuff. So it's a different cycle. But the game that came to my mind where stories have done very well is in the roguelike loop. There's a lot of different, sort of angles that a story can be framed around that concept of just trying over and over and over again.
I mean, we've seen this now with Hades and with Returnal, where they're actually really effective at telling a story. So it definitely gives them, there's creative opportunity there. It has not been explored really in Souls games or Sekiro in a meaningful way. So if you have like the depth of a story of R.R. Martin, it's like, now it's really testing them to be able to tell a story in ways that they've never done before.
Cool.
Well, we were with this whole program, we were supposed to also look at news stories which could probably take up an hour on its own. So we can keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about them. I think we can go more quickly through these because we're just going to say like
yeah, some of it's
speculative.
Well, we'll see.
It's speculative, and a lot of it's like, here's what we either think will be a topic or we're going to keep our eye out for, given what we know of today for the year 2020. And, especially given what happened recently in 2021, what we know of it right now in this moment at the beginning of 2022, and sort of what the trends that we are forecasting out look like. Here's sort of the topics that we are interested in that we either think will be a thing or that there's going to be some announcement made for them.
Yeah, and I think all the news topics that I kind of chose here have a significant industry impact.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just like, oh, it's a big news story because it's interesting. It's like these things should be continuing their stories into 2022 and possibly concluding from where they started in 2021 or before, and what that means for the industry as a whole. So let's just get into it and try to talk about these. The first story I picked, kind of we've talked about before, and that is the Nintendo Switch and its successor. It's long been rumored. We know that the rumors about Switch OLED version got mixed with manufacturing rumors of a Switch 2 or whatever the next version of Switch might be.
Switcheroo.
The Switcheroo Switch story. But I think the only reason why Nintendo would not announce a new platform this year and would wait next year is because of manufacturing issues, not because they want to. Although the Switch is still very successful, their game production has kind of ramped down, and there's not seeing the same sort of like push for big Nintendo games. Like, we haven't heard of a new Mario game at all. We haven't heard, like, the new Zelda game. I think could very well pull a Zelda game that they've done twice in a row now, where like you see a Zelda game that releases on two platforms simultaneously. They did that with Twilight Princess. They did it with Breath of the Wild. So we could see the next Zelda game actually being a cross-platform or cross-generation type title. Pokemon is coming out possibly this year, but this would be like their last major title that they have like primed and ready to go before we see Nintendo's next platform. There's lots of reasons that a next platform has to exist, not least of which is that the hardware architecture that they're running off of is done. Like, Nvidia is not producing it anymore.
Yeah, that's the one. Unless they found some other fab that they were able to take the designs for and it sort of slotted in
they could have
for like a way to bridge a gap, let's say. That is a serious problem if they don't have any way to source new parts.
It's also a super expensive solution for them to go, okay, we're going to take the architectural design, we're going to go to some fabricator in Taiwan to start fabricating or to start producing these chips so that we can slot them into a next version, or like to bridge the gap between the end of Switch and the beginning of whatever the next Switch console is. Instead, I think they would have just placed the order to produce as many as they could to get as many as they need for the end of life of the Switch, barring the fact that they may not have been able to predict that was actually going to be the case, given that the pandemic hit and then suddenly their Switch sales boosted.
I'm sort of personally going to be the contrarian here, and I personally am not. I don't think we're going to see a new Switch in 2022. I think
a release Switch, I agree.
Sure, a release one. We may see one announced. That's a good point. The reason that I say that is it's only in March of this year, 2022. It will be 5 years old. It is in modern console generational terms. That's super short, right? 7 years is sort of like the average. I think that's what I guess the PS4 was what, 2014 to 2016, late 2013 to 2020 was when.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you count whole
years.
years, you're talking about 2014 to 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was roughly 6 years, and same for the Xbox One. And so we're looking at I guess it's not that far off, but I would expect that the Switch 2 would probably launch around March of 2023, because that's when March of 2017 was when the original Switch launched. Part of that is that, like, yeah, it might be more expensive to Nintendo to build some more stuff, but as long as it's not uber expensive, and again, chip shortage might make that extra crazy. The fact that Nintendo sold so many consoles, even just this last few weeks, is like, why would you change and try to get everybody onto a new console when the current one is selling gangbusters? Like, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat.
I think the problem is that they don't have a long-term plan, and I don't think they intended that they were preparing the Switch to see such a sizable jump in sales because no one predicted the pandemic happening.
That is that. Yes, that's true.
And that's the problem. It's like I think they were well preparing for end of life. That's why there's not really, at this point in the life cycle, seeing that 2020 happened when it did, we're still not seeing like major game releases at the end of the Switch's lifespan. You're seeing kind of what you typically saw from Nintendo at the end of the lifespan, where just like the releases get further and far between, and a potential Zelda is the capstone to the generation, with it being also the same game that transitions. That may or may not be true. I think the biggest thing that's going to impede them from being able to do a Switch 2 or whatever they'd call the next one is chip shortages. Like, the only reason why they would drag it out another year and go like, we're just going to keep going with what we have, and yes, we're not going to have very many releases, and the majority of games that will release for this will be, indie games and games that need an internet connection to work. But we're okay with that solution, so good enough. But that also means then that the following 2 years after that, which are usually like what you're seeing now with the Switch, is usually like the last 2 years that like another console's out, but they're still selling the previous one at like dirt cheap prices. It's kind of like a weird. It's kind of a weird period for the Switch.
Yeah,
I believe that they'll announce Switch 2 or whatever they're going to call it.
They did also announce the Switch OLED last year, right? And that was sort of the part of the reason that I'm like, I don't know, is because the Switch OLED is relatively new, and it would really only have had like 1 year of a life cycle.
Well, yeah, but also because they just take it over. Like that, I think that's the whole. Them going, well, we can raise the price on this, and the panels that we just purchased are cheap enough that we can throw them into the console without a significant redesign.
I guess there's that. If it depends on costs and everything.
Yeah. There's reasons for them to do it. They've also flipped it, and it's not within the realm of Nintendo to release like a DXXL a year before they replace it with a brand new console.
Right.
Knowing that the brand new console is going to have a low sell-in initially. We'll see. Let's just move on to the next topic, though. I think this one's kind of interesting. PlayStation Studios has their movie branch to them. Sony, as a movie producer, has had a hard time finding movies that have done really well. This year, it's kind of a different one because both Spider-Man and Ghostbusters performed really well. But prior to this, they're struggling to find IPs that they could keep their studios afloat with. And they kind of turned to PlayStation IPs as a place that there's like a lot of untapped IPs that could be brought to cinema. What I find interesting about this whole thing is that game movies in general have traditionally been pretty awful. There's very few examples of games that have been turned into cinema and succeeded in ways that really felt that a game was being brought to the movies in a way that felt authentic and original and good.
Sort of like the perfect adaptation of the original Super Mario Brothers movie.
which they're readapting now, right? Like,
Yeah,
we got a new Mario movie coming out with
with Chris Pratt as Mario
doing his best Italian impression.
Yep.
Not offensively,
right? Speaking with it would be very weird to see him like the voice of Emmett from the Lego Movie to be also Mario. It's like, if he's not doing the like, what are you saying? I don't know, like how that's gonna go. Anyway, I didn't mean to distract with the Mario movie. That was just the earliest example I have in my mind of being a kid and being in the movie theater, expecting Mario and seeing that and being like, what?
Yeah, no, I that's been the case over and over.
Yeah.
Doom, Resident Evil,
the horror ones, like what's it called there?
Silent Hill.
The one. Yep.
Yeah, we also got Monster Hunter last year, which was awful.
That's not to say
it's got a theme of like just bad movies being made out of games, and I think a lot of times too is because it's a cheap cash in. They're just like, look at the success of this game. We can at least grab half of them. If we can do this movie for a budget of under $50 million, we can certainly make our money back. And so I think a lot of studios are just using it as a cheap write-off. If it tanks, then that's a write-off against the studios. Right. But it feels like Sony is actually doing it in earnest and going, no, we're going to make big-budget PlayStation-based IP movies, and we just need to find the formula that works. And I kind of liken this back to the era of Fox taking on the X-Men movies. For all the flaws that those had and for all the flaws that Bryan Singer is, they were able to find something that felt good as a superhero movie without feeling like it was pandering too much and didn't feel like it was selling out its content and its IP in a way that made it feel like it wasn't something that you try, especially with all the kids that were growing up around the X-Men movie, the X-Men cartoon. Like, this was taking aspects of that and making it for a more mature audience, and it worked. And this is what they need to figure out with game movies. Uncharted is first. They have Twisted Metal lined up. They have Ghost of Tsushima lined up. All of which are in development. Uncharted is releasing, I think, in a month or so. So if this succeeds, I see this as kind of a Pandora's box in the same way X-Men was a Pandora's box to superhero films. Like, there was a lot of really bad superhero films up to that point, specifically based off of comic books. And at the point in which X-Men was succeeded, Spider-Man came shortly after that. And then after that, the door was blown wide open for a whole range of really great superhero movies, leading us to 10 years of Marvel entertainment that has rarely missed the mark to the point where it could be considered a failure. So yeah, it should be interesting if it does succeed. I think they'll sort of create a pipeline for a bunch of other game IPs to hit the cinema in the near future. Bioshock would be a great one.
Yeah.
Or System Shock for that matter.
Bioshock might be difficult if for anyone who's played through to the end. Sort of like one of the big reveals and moments is sort of like the medium is part of the point. So there is that.
Yeah, but all you need is like a Nolan-esque twist.
That's true.
Instead of being like,
give it to Nolan, and you're set. You're done.
Yeah, it's no longer about you being the player and just following directions. Instead, it can be about subverting expectations of the movie viewers and what cinema actually is.
Moving on.
Cool. So, future of Game Pass. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I threw in Project Spartacus as well because I think there's a lot to be said for that. For those who aren't aware, Game Pass is Microsoft's sort of like subscription service for gaming where you get access to all their stuff. If you have Game Pass Ultimate, it's a certain tier, then you can do game streaming onto mobile devices and other through the browser and a bunch of other stuff. They have been pushing hard on this where all of their first-party titles are like day-and-date launch with that service, and they have games that cycle in and out. Reviews from the press and from gamers tend to be extremely positive about this, that people are like, they're playing more games than they had otherwise, and are like loading up games on their Xboxes and their PCs that they never would have tried otherwise. And they're finding like gems that speak to them as players that they never would have taken the $5 or $10 for like an indie title to bother trying it, and now they're getting more experience and having more fun there. It certainly seems very interesting. Neither Justin nor I. Actually, Justin, you might have access to Game Pass sort of right now, right?
I did, but it was before they had done the complete rollout of Ultimate, so I couldn't actually get game streaming on my
on my devices
computer yet. Yeah.
So the other aspect of this is that last year we heard rumors of, I think Bloomberg or something spilled the beans on Sony's Project Spartacus, which is their sort of response, their own subscription, game subscription service that is, it looks like it's going to subsume aspects of the PlayStation Plus system or be a tier along with that. Just how that happens and unfolds seems to be a really interesting, play for how the game industry economics work. Who makes what money on what platform, what games are released, how long they stay. These are all new experiments that are being run in the games industry right now. And it'll be interesting to see sort of what effect that has for developers, for gamers, and Microsoft's been really pushing hard on this, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes in 2022.
Certainly. And, I think this has the potential to be, a huge shift in the way games are, like the game industry as a whole moves to the future. I keep arguing that basically games as a service is the future. It opens it up to a much wider gaming audience than we're currently limited to. Like I've talked about it before in past videos, where there's basically there's like this 120 million user cap that we keep seeing repeat over and over again since the PS2 era.
For console games.
For console gaming. And it's largely due to the fact that there's a fairly sizable initial buy-in before you can play games that is prohibitive to people who have less income, who are developing countries. And it doesn't mean that content shouldn't be any more available to them. It's that we created a barrier to it, and Game Pass sort of beyond the cost for subscription helps take out some of the costs and open it up to a wider population. I think it is the future, even if we don't want it to be, because we like our hard media. But if Nintendo or if Microsoft succeeds with this in a way that's sizable, I think we're going to see an entire shift in the way the gaming industry functions over the long term. Next topic, NFTs as a source of revenue for game companies. This is a kind of a hot issue, mainly because I think the game industry does not have the greatest track record of finding ways of extracting money from gamers in a way that's not anything short of them manipulating games to build gamers of more money. This has been the case with EA and Ubisoft, and people are pretty sick of game developers going, okay, we're going to intentionally hobble a game, or we're going to intentionally remove content from the game, or we're going to intentionally do one thing or another in order to find a way for you to pay us more money for a game that you already paid $70 for. And NFTs, I think, there's a manner in which people pursue NFTs in which it could be the exact same thing over and over again, and I don't think there's a whole lot of tolerance in it from the most ardent gamers out there. But there is some pluses to it. Eric, do you want to talk about pros and cons a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, actually, I'm not sure I'm the person to talk about pros. Because I legitimately... I've asked several people who have been very excited about NFTs, like, why are you excited about NFTs? What is the point? And I mean, inevitably, it seems like a way to store money. It's really what it comes down to. There is something where you can have provably unique digital goods. Okay, I don't know that I want that in my games specifically. Like, I'm on popular games. I'm going to be one of millions of players, and the likelihood that I'm going to get an item in a game, I don't want that to be gated by actual real-world economics. I want that to be gated by progress in the game and what I'm doing. I guess the one thing where this could be interesting is in player-created content. but that's a whole topic, and it's only really speaks to a specific type of game, or a game where you as a player, that's part of what you're interested in doing. Maybe something like StarCraft, it's not StarCraft, Minecraft, where you can go in and build a world and you sell. I don't know what you would do with NFTs there. Would you sell the world if your world is an NFT? I don't. It gets really weird. The problems I have with NFTs are, I think it's a bubble market right now. It seems to be that way. Like the speed and ferocity. There you go. I think that's a word. With which people have been jumping into NFTs and throwing money at it is sort of like, I don't know that people understand what it is yet. It sort of came on the scene and then everybody threw money on it, and it seemed to be like the next evolution of Bitcoin or of digital currency. And as a result, everyone, because those other things sometimes were very profitable, people wanted to jump in on it. And then, of course, there's the environmental impact, where building this stuff and participating in hashing stuff to mine your own cryptocurrency and dealing with all this stuff is extremely bad for the environment. And is not great. I'm personally negative on NFTs for a number of reasons. But regardless of my thoughts, it seems that there are people out there, both like players and game developers, who are interested in exploring NFTs in games. And whether that be for items or for entire games built with NFTs, where some of your things that you build in the game or that you make in the game come out as NFTs. I don't understand how the mechanisms, but there seems to be energy there.
I think it comes down to is like whether or not game developers are capable of finding the right type of game in which NFTs make sense, opposed to trying to shove it into every game. And I think that's a fine line that they've not been able to thread before. They might have learned from it, but who knows? Like basically, I think when people see money and numbers and the potential of things, they go forward with it rather foolishly and can undermine the value of games, right? Like it makes sense in a game like World of Warcraft for maybe having NFTs associated with a weapon generating system that could generate any number of potential variables, in which it's like you see this with not Tiny Tina's, Borderlands, where like their system can generate anything like 200,000 guns or more than that. I think it's in the millions. That it can generate millions of guns based off of the way that they built the system to generate a weapon. And any one of those could be associated with an NFT that generates in your game, and then you could sell it later for real money. Trade it through some sort of marketplace that allows you to do that. And like you said before, user-generated content, games that are ripe for creation, right, like Minecraft or Dreams or any one of those things, allows artists and creators to get an easy way of monetizing their content. Right. But at the same time, you can shoehorn this into other games and then end up having a nightmare where basically, weapons are created and gated based off of the monetary concepts around it, instead of the fact that they've created a game in which you could attach a monetary system to it that works well for it.
Yeah. It's sort of like NFTs are. My understanding is that each NFT is supposed to be unique, right? So you don't have. It's not the same as a currency where you have like a Bitcoin, right? And you can have multiple copies of that. They're each individual items and individualized and guaranteed to be unique.
Well, in the same way that a Bitcoin is also entirely individual.
Right, but the point is that like you have a vault that has a whole lot of these individuals, and they're all on the surface. Each one is worth the same amount. They perform the same function. They are the same. If the cost of one goes up, they all go up. That's not true with NFTs. NFTs are all about like what's attached to it. And if the original NFT buying spree was
it was a way of authenticating and creating an entirely original thing that can then be sold and resold with the rights passing from person to person without it being duplicated, or at least duplicated in a way that is untraceable.
Yeah, the duplication aspect is interesting because frequently what you can do is duplicate the content that runs on the computer, right? Like, for instance, NFTs, my understanding of the first NFTs that were out there were art developed by artists, right? And people were going out and literally finding images on the web or generating images with Photoshop, doodling in Photoshop, taking those, putting through an NFT generator and saying, when you buy this, you get the rights to this image.
Yeah,
you own this image. That doesn't stop me from taking a screenshot or literally copying the pixel for pixel data and having exactly that same thing on my computer.
Sure, but you also can then you can say that is not a real version of this because the original one was under this NFT.
Right. That is correct.
This is certainly a copy.
Right.
And incorrect.
Right, but there's also, this has caused a huge problem because people literally went out and found other works of art or took a photo or found just something on Google image search and threw it into the NFT.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, presumably you could have a system like Ubisoft in a game generating NFTs to a system like a weapon generating system.
You could.
And then going, this thing does not have the token that should be associated with this object. This is a counterfeit, and we don't accept it in the game.
You can do that. The question is, like, why? We already have games where you generate guns. Why do you need to sell them? I guess. Like, here's the thing. If we're talking about that as an example, I know you just threw that off the cuff. I'm putting this out there as more of a thought piece. Blizzard tried to do a real world with real world money auction house for Diablo 3. They ended up shutting it down because it ruined the game.
Yeah.
And so, like, in this exploration, there's going to need to be a lot of sort of trial and error to find something that actually where you're now it makes sense.
What did exist, and where this graphs onto well is in World of Warcraft, people sold their characters and content that they were able to collect by playing the game for however long. So you could sell your character and all the data associated with it, basically by giving someone else your account. For whatever it is, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. And an NFT system could make that part of the function of the game by making your ability to generate, create, play through, and create static characters in a game sellable without having to switch over accounts and whatnot.
Let me say this. I think that Blizzard, had they cared to, had this been a part of their design, would not have needed NFTs to do this. They could have built it, and they did it with the auction house. There's no reason that this required NFTs. I guess this is kind of my point, is trying to find the right thing. For me, right now, and I think this may be why I'm not going to be the person who comes up with the billion-dollar concepts, right? NFTs to me feel like a solution looking for a problem. Where everyone, it's like the people with Ethereum and everything trying to convince the world that cryptocurrency is going to be the backbone of Web 3.0. Where it's like you start talking into details, you talk to anybody about this stuff, and I have yet to read a piece or talk to anybody who's able to get beyond the big words about it that are like all the fanfare and the like brass tacks and say how it works and why it's better. Everything sort of falls apart at that point. I don't know. Again, I'm not the person to talk to about the positives on this one. It's like,
well, I mean, I think what it comes down to is that in some ways it's a solution looking for a problem, but at the same time, it's like clearly the problem had existed before, and here's a packaged solution for it. The problem is when you're trying to take the solution and apply it to something that didn't have the problem in the first place, and then creating a monetary system that takes real money to buy things that didn't need to exist. Like it's when you put loot boxes in a game that didn't need loot boxes before because it allowed EA to extract more money from the player. And this is when it comes down to, is like, there are right times for this, and there's probably games that could actually benefit from a system like this, but not every game benefits from it Just because you saw money signs in one place does not mean you can get money signs from another. And if anything, it can break games. It can break games to the point where, it's sort of like DLC. It's like you have to legitimately question, like, if you have the DLC ready day one, doesn't that mean you just took it out from the game and then figured you could package it and sell for $5?
Right.
Yeah. And that's a real question to be asked. And it's like, well, I already paid $70 for the game. You're looking to tell me that you couldn't spend, you couldn't put this in the game and given me that for the package price. You wanted to extract another $5 from me. And this is where game developers have really faltered, because they're like, hey, I found a way to make more money. And then people go, yeah, it looks like you found a way to make more money, opposed to like doing it in maybe the way that it worked in Fallout 3, where the DLC launched years after, and it was a way to expand the gameplay of the game, which makes sense. It doesn't make sense when it's there the day after, and you're just seriously questioning why it wasn't in the game in the first place.
I'm also of the mind that, like, I spend $60 on a game, and then I don't understand why a few set of textures for my main character suddenly warrants, an eighth of the cost of all the other stuff that went into it. It's all vanity gear and vanity stuff. But anyway, we're a little off topic. The reason that NFTs made our list is because it does seem to be a topic of interest for the industry, and there does appear to be sort of a trend that game studios and publishers and asset developers are aware of and concerned about, and there may be some movement in that zone. We think 2022 maybe.
I mean, in the same way that microtransactions are not gone, they've been whittled down to what works.
Yeah.
I think NFTs will be the vehicle for future microtransactions. It's just we're going to get bludgeoned with some really awful ideas that are going to be thrown in games, and people are going to throw a fit over it, rightfully so, before we actually get NFTs working in a way that are useful, before Zuckerberg, implements it into his metaverse,
right,
and then it turns out all your virtual goods are going to go through Facebook or something like that.
Let's call it the Faceverse.
Yeah, Faceverse. All right, the last two things I think we're going to cover quickly, because I think we're well over time at this point. We're not actually broadcasting to YouTube, it turns out, because the authentication key failed.
I was thinking about mentioning that before. I ended up sending my family
We are broadcasting
Twitch.
to
Yeah,
Twitch.
I checked and I was like, maybe I just don't have the link or something. But anyway.
No, YouTube. I think because I have to set it up every time.
Anyways,
will be rectified for the next time. The last two, and I think we're going to go over these very quickly, is that there are two lawsuits that are very important. That I think are going to have that will continue on this year. One of which is Activision's ongoing issues with harassment and well, I mean, I guess to wrap it up is harassment broadly, but there's a lot of individual cases within that that are going to continue into this year. It's been evolving, in which people are unionizing now, which the game industry has been trying to avoid forever. And if this continues to progress, unionizations happen, and I could actually see the larger engineering fields go for unions, because they probably have to protect their jobs. That this could potentially be the beginning of quite a seismic shift in the way engineering is done in the U.S. and possibly abroad, in the way we treat our engineers and our creators and all that stuff, starting with the game industry. It could be a widespread issue that spreads out to most software development, or it's going to be isolated to just the game industry, or possibly even just Activision. But either way, this is one to follow, because of what it could mean for the future of the game industry, developers specifically. Last one, I want to talk about Apple and monopolies.
Yeah, are the mobile game platforms a monopoly, right? The Asset Store, the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, can these be considered monopolies for their platform, but for their hardware platform, or operating system platform, let's say? Or is the fact that there are multiple of these stores in existence at all enough for us, at least as Americans, I don't know about the rest of the world, to decide that this is not a monopoly, right? That we're safe. Apple / Google / whoever else is safe. This was has been pretty big for the games industry. It's sort of gating Epic from some of the stuff that they want to do. It's gating Microsoft from things that they want to do on mobile devices. And both Google and Apple have been sort of pushing back on this for obvious reasons, the money sign being the big one. Part of this becomes a question of do the existing court cases get their hearings this year in 2022, or are there going to be technicalities that bump it out in the future? I mean, regardless, mobile gaming is massive. I mentioned earlier in the show that Justin said there seemed to be a cap in the industry and in the marketplace, and I specifically said for console, because mobile is a different sector that has an actual much bigger sell-through rate of hardware, at least. So it's what does this mean for gamers? What does this mean for the platform holders?
I think the big thing to focus on here is that there's multiple cases being pushed by other countries that have more strict business standards than the U.S. does. Yeah. For one, which could have an impact on the U.S. Or the way they function within the U.S. because sometimes it's harder to apply one change to one country when it has to be applied to all of them, just to simplify the system. Unlikely to happen, but the court case in California, basically the way they ruled on it left it wide open for other people to bring lawsuits because the judge left the specter of a credible case that submits enough evidence that the duopoly or monopoly does in fact exist and is causing damages, was left open for a future lawsuit and prosecutor to put up against Apple and Google. And if they successfully do that this year or potentially next year, it's going to have a seismic impact on mobile gaming as a whole.
Yep.
And gaming in general, because you can't really have a change in mobile without it changing the rest of the game industry.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean,
not at this point. Anyways, that was our 2022 recap. This is, I think, the longest show we've ever had. It's now 2.5 hours long, probably 2 hours to be honest. But thanks everybody for watching. I know we only streamed to Twitch today. We usually stream on Twitch and YouTube, but we had some issues there that will get fixed next time around. I'll post the video on YouTube if you want to watch it there, but it's going to be as just like a really long form video. So we'll catch you next week where we talk about PSVR 2. So again, Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube with the Slug Sonic Boom TV. We'll see you then.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.